What if there's something stuck in our drain? What? Hey, honey,
Yeah,
did you throw E.T. in the toilet?
I hate that game!
Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, back again with an update for my game room. But if you don't remember, back in November, I discovered that I had water in my basement and mold had pretty much taken over a corner and damaged both the carpet as well as one of the entertainment units that I use. Thankfully, no games were harmed, and that's because it was a slow leak, but it was very disconcerting because, like I mentioned in the previous video, my basement is actually partially underground. So my house actually sits on a hill and it's partially buried. So it was really hard to say at the time exactly what the problem was because it's 8 feet underground. It's not like I can walk around the front and just sort of see what is happening. Now, because we can't easily see what's happening, that one of the bids that we got was to basically just fix the inside of our house. Just assume that all of those form ties are probably going to either leak or eventually leak. And one of the solutions that they do that's pretty common here in the Seattle area is to dig a trench on the inside of your house and then put up this barrier, again, on the inside of your house. Now, that bid was going to be about $7,000. I will say that ultimately we didn't have to do that, and I'm very grateful for it. I also want to mention that we had a lot of people recommend that, hey, to do this right, you need to fix the outside front of your house. And we got a couple guesstimates on how much that would cost. And I mentioned it in the previous video, and some of you were very surprised to hear how much that was. And I just want to clarify, kind of where that number came from. Now, I really didn't get into all the specifics in that previous video because honestly, I didn't think most people would really care. But it turns out a lot of you have homes, you have game rooms, and maybe you have basements, and you might have to deal with some of this stuff. So I want to just tell you that there's a little bit more going on the front of my house than I initially let on. And a couple of things there. First of all, like I mentioned, our house is built into the side of a hill. And that means that our front yard is actually a slope. And so the street in front of our house is just slightly higher than our front door. So yes, you would think you could just basically build a straight trench 8 feet down and then repair the front of my house. But because it's a slope and because of our weather and the rain and all that sort of stuff, you'd actually have to grade it towards the street a little bit. And in doing so, you end up digging up about a third of our front yard. What that means is you'd potentially have to dig around or remove part of our sidewalk, our porch. We also have 2 fairly large bushes or small trees in our front yard to kind of deal with. But the real issue, and the reason why it could potentially cost so much money to dig in my front yard, well, our house has oil heat. And in the 50s and 60s in Seattle, it was very common to bury the oil tank in the front yard. So in our front yard, we have a 300-gallon oil tank that is old as our house. So it's an oil tank that has been sitting there for 58 years. Now, every contractor that we talked to basically said, you do not want to disturb an oil tank that large that's been in the ground for that long. And the reason is, if there is an oil leak detected, or while working around it, you potentially damage the oil tank and it starts to leak even a little bit, government agencies have to get involved at that point. So then you have potentially the Department of Ecology or the EPA that have to come out and test the soil. You have to see if it's potentially spread over to your neighbor. It just becomes a huge, huge mess. So we wanted to avoid that at all costs, obviously, because again, the cost could potentially be a lot just to fix the oil. And then, of course, you still have to fix the basement on top of that. So that's where that unusually high number comes from. Now, like I mentioned before, about a year and a half, coming on 2 years ago, we had a driveway or parking pad put into the front of our house. It used to be completely just gravel and dirt, but it just seems a little bit too much coincidence that this house has stood for so long, for 58 years, and the basement's never ever leaked. And then suddenly when we put in the driveway, the parking pad, it's starting to leak. Now, it could be coincidence, but we needed to know for sure. I've mentioned in the past that my wife is a real estate agent. She's been doing it for a long time, and part of her job is to know a bunch of handyman and professionals that can work with her clients to fix houses and things like that. So I asked her if she would reach out to a guy named Jason, who is part of a sewer scope company. And what they do is they come out with this little machine with a camera on it to put it into drainage systems and sewer systems to make sure that there's no blockage. So Jason puts the camera in there, and sure enough, we discover that the drainage from the driveway is actually being directed into the flower bed. So that at that point was good news, bad news, because it's good news because now we know what the real problem is. I mean, we were so close to basically paying that company to fix the inside downstairs, and that wouldn't have fixed the overall problem. So that's great news. But now the problem is, well, we need to fix the drainage system, and then we also need to fix the basement. And since we had him out here, we also took this opportunity to just have him scope the entire side drain that runs along the side of our house, and just make sure that that was fine. Again, if we're gonna go down this path, we don't want any more surprises. And that was actually really nice to know. That was a little bit of peace of mind. He was able to say, yes, the side drain on the house does look fine. It goes all the way into the backyard, which is great. Now, obviously at this point, I was thinking, maybe we should go back to the company that did the work and have them fix it. But the reason we decided to not go back to that asphalt company is because, well, Jason pointed out that they know how to pour asphalt, but they don't know how to install a drain, and they probably wouldn't even understand how to fix it properly. And to be quite honest, we didn't want them working on our house anymore and messing something else up. Thankfully, actually, after a couple weeks, her buddy Jason had some free time in his schedule. He has experience building homes from the ground up. So he's like, I'll come over and I'll fix it for you. Now, it was at this point when he actually started digging into the ground that we discovered something interesting. So my wife was very adamant when they put the parking pad in there that they needed to tie into the side drain. We do not have a front drainage system. They needed to tie into it. Well, when Jason started digging into it, he discovers that they indeed did that. They actually tied the drain both into the flower bed, and then the top of it, they tied into the side drain. So it was a mess. It was absolutely a mess. They did both. They flow water into the flower bed and then also to the drainage system. But because the flower bed is slightly lower, that's where the majority of the water went. So for the next few days, he dug it up. He basically dug up that cement block that they had used, and then just simply rotated it 90 degrees so that instead of facing towards the front, it would actually face towards the side of the house. And then he prepared to tie it into the side drain. I gotta be honest with you, it's really interesting to watch him do this work because it was way more work than I ever expected. That pavement was thick and tough, and he is a trooper, man. It was really interesting to go out there and film him and talk to him and see how this works, because it was definitely not easy. And it took him about 3.5 days to do all of this work, make sure that everything was packed down and solid and cured. And then basically I just watched it. So we had a couple big storms come through, and after every single one of them, I would look to see if it ever leaked downstairs. And it was amazing. I mean, it just stopped it completely. But Jason did have a good point. So he's like, your front of the foundation is probably eroded. And then we brought back Permadry What they recommend we do is fix the cracks and holes using their crack injection. And you see that right here. Basically what he does, he drills a hole where the problems are and then inserts this little port, and then he's got this mixture down here that squirts polyurethane into the cracks, and then that expands to fill the gaps. And he just goes down the line filling these one by one. It takes about an hour and a half or so. And what was really interesting about this is that he basically noticed about halfway through, or about the middle part right there, that it was almost completely eroded on the other side. It was taking a ton of that polyurethane. So that told me that we made the right decision by, fixing this as well, even though the outside is technically fixed and shouldn't have a problem, but you just don't want to have to deal with this in the future. The other thing he said too, which was really interesting, is that this solution also is earthquake proof. So I was kind of curious about that, because he's like, one of the things is if you have a crack like this and we have a small earthquake, well, that can make it worse. But this polyurethane is actually it never actually gets hard. It's almost like a rubber, I guess. And so it will move with the house if it needs to. And this service ended up costing us about $1,800. And again, at the end of it, it was, I think, a little bit more than I was expecting, but for peace of mind, knowing that we actually solved the problem both outside the house and inside, I feel was completely worth it. Well, guys, as you can see, my game room is mostly put back together. Now, all told, I spent a little under $5,000, and that does include the new IKEA furniture that I had to get. And I have to say, I count myself incredibly lucky. This could have been so much worse and so much more expensive. Also, some of you have asked about our insurance that we have on our home. Well, in this particular case, we decided not to use it because our deductible is $3,000. So, as you guys know, if you use your insurance, sometimes they raise the rates. So in this particular case, it just didn't make sense to do that. Although you better believe if this thing had actually flooded, or if we needed to dig into the front yard, or if a tree falls on the house, or there's an earthquake, we absolutely would use the insurance. But in this case, we paid for it out of pocket. And I just gotta say, it is so great to have this game room back. It took a long 2 months to do it, but I'm very happy with the results. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care. Turn on your heart light in the middle of a young boy's dream. Don't wake me up too soon. We're gonna take a ride across the moon. You and me. Yeah.